asymmetric information. What happens when both sides of a market transaction don't have the same information? It creates a market failure. A market failure is a situation in which a market left to itself does not produce the most efficient allocation of resources. And our explanation of this market failure begins in New Delhi, where a now famous economist, as a young man, George Akerlof, spent a year. And he noticed a particular problem in markets in India, which he would have noticed in any developing country, that he formulated into the asymmetric information problem, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2001. And the problem is that both parties to the transaction, the buyer and the seller, don't have the same information about the product. Symmetry refers to when something is the same on both sides. So when both parties don't have the same information, we have an asymmetric information problem. And in writing about this problem, he decided to use the market for used cars. You know, a car that gives a lot of problems, sort of more problems than other cars of the same type and make, are called lemons. So Akerlof wrote about the market for lemons. Here is a problem with the used car market. Say we have a used car lot in which on a Sunday, people that have cars to sell bring them to this lot, and buyers know that this is where you can go and find people who are selling used cars. So one seller comes along, you know, and a young man who has, you know, driven his car, you know, really hard, you know, and hasn't maintained it properly, and it has been in a few accidents. And another person comes along selling a visually identical car, but you know, this may be an elderly woman who has not driven it that much. Make sure that it has gotten service regularly. You know, only drives it to church on a Sunday, and or to wherever she worships, and you know, the car therefore is in actually much better condition. The thing about used cars though is that you can't often look at them and know the quality of the car. So the underlying value of the first car is, say, 1 million. Of the second car, it's 2 million. But when the buyer comes along, she can't really tell the difference. So how much should she offer? Well, she's not going to offer $2 million, because if she offers $2 million, there's a half a chance she's going to get a car worth that is actually worth much less than that. So she gets an idea. She takes the expected value. She takes the average. She has a 50% chance of getting $1 million car and a 50% chance of getting a $2 million car. And so she decides to offer 1.5 million. Half a chance she'll be ahead, half a chance she'll be behind. But if she offers 1.5 million to the person who knows that their car is worth more than that, that person exits the market. by apparently reversing out of the lot. That market where people are offering the expected value, the average value they expect to get from the purchase, is not a good market for people that have the better quality cars. So the better quality cars will tend to exit the market, and only the poorer quality used cars remain in the market. The quality of the products in the market will deteriorate and will continue to deteriorate, because even within the poor quality versions, there is variation, and the same process repeats itself. And so the market descends into the poorest quality versions of that product because of asymmetric information. And it actually doesn't matter which side of the market has the information and which side doesn't. The health insurance market is an example of a market where the buyer, the persons who are buying health insurance, tend to have an idea of whether they are healthy or sickly. The seller of health insurance doesn't have that confidence and has to decide how much premium to charge. But if they charge a premium that represents the average of what they have to pay out for a healthy person versus a sickly person, then that's not a good deal for the person who's healthy. And that person will tend to exit the market. So left to itself, the health insurance market becomes a market only for those who are more sickly. These two examples demonstrate that asymmetric information in a market gives rise to what is called adverse selection, a market outcome in which, because of asymmetric information, better quality commodities are driven out of the market. The market selects adversely for quality. Another example would be the market for microcredit. That the market for microcredit is not a market in which borrowers tend to have collateral or a long demonstrable credit history. So when two borrowers come into a lender, one borrower might be somebody who has great integrity and is highly responsible, and the other borrower not. The lender has to charge a rate of interest that reflects the risk of non-repayment. That risk of non-repayment reflects, even in part, the person who is irresponsible and lacks integrity and is highly likely to default. Then it's not a good loan for the responsible person. That is why microcredit is difficult in every country. What to do? Well, asymmetric information is interesting because the problem that it creates, the market itself has developed ways to compensate for it. Take a look at this.
Generations of choosy females have driven the evolution of these remarkable displays. The more extravagant a male is, the more likely he will be noticed. The six-plumed bird of paradise displays in his special clearing on the forest floor. towards the low branches of bushes. This female is modestly dressed. The male has a good set of lungs, but he'll have to do more than flutter his eyelids if he wants to impress her. It'll all depend on his performance. The females may be dull looking, but they're very picky. And it's time for a really close inspection. His right side looks fine, but what about his left? Pretty impressive, but is he magnificent enough? Oh dear, her departure says it all.
From the BBC series Planet Earth. And you know, that's an asymmetric information problem. That the male is aware of its genetic quality, the female doesn't really know and has to find ways of establishing what it is she is getting into, what it is she is buying. So that clip actually demonstrates the way, two possible ways to deal with the asymmetric information problem, and we saw both of them on display. One is screening. That's what the female birds were doing. The ignorant side tries to find ways to investigate the quality of what it is that they are going to be transacting with. Meanwhile, the male birds were engaged in signaling, in finding ways to demonstrate the quality of what they are providing. Screening and signaling is actually what private markets do in the presence of the asymmetric information problem. So let's go back to used cars. One thing that screeners do, that buyers do, is they take it for a test drive. Or they get a mechanic to come and look at the car at a greater level of scrutiny than the typical buyer is capable of doing. All of those are examples of screening. What about the job market? Well, that's a market with asymmetric information. You know, the potential employee, the provider of labor, knows how smart he is and how hard he's willing to work and the level of his or her commitment. But the employer doesn't have that information. The employer is unaware of the actual quality of what they might be getting. That's why we have interviews. That is, the employers, potential employers, are interviewing to screen and to try to get an idea of the quality of the applicant. Meanwhile, the knowledgeable side wants to signal. And so the knowledgeable side gets certification. They go to universities to demonstrate that they're able to apply themselves, that they're able to learn, and that they're able to achieve long-term goals. A university degree, as an example of a certificate, might be less about the actual knowledge. Certainly an undergraduate degree might be less about the actual knowledge that you're learning, that you're acquiring, and more about your ability to signal to employers your character and what you are capable of. Another example of the asymmetric information problem is restaurants. You know, you walk by a random restaurant and you don't really know what is the quality of the food that you're getting. If it's a fried chicken cook shop, you really don't know what you're getting. That's an asymmetric information problem. Of course, the kitchen knows. And that's one of the reasons why we have branding. That's why markets invented branding. And it applies to more than just cook shops and restaurants. Branding is a signal that you know exactly what you're getting. Once you see the KFC or the Burger King, it tells you that you have an assurance of what you're getting because you've had it before. Branding was invented as a way to solve the asymmetric information problem for a variety of products, from food to sneakers. What about the market for mates, for girlfriends and boyfriends and spouses? Well, this is the classic asymmetric information problem. You know, women tend to be picky and being unsure of the quality, genetic and character of what they're getting into. And so therefore, they need to investigate. So women are keen on dating. That's the investigation process. Men need to demonstrate whatever it is that men want to demonstrate. And that might be why men tend to fight more and play sports, because they are demonstrating the things that reflect their genetic quality. And as much as this was initially put into the lecture as an example as another example of the asymmetric information problem, when you get right down to it, it is simply a reproduction of what we saw with the birds. It really is no different. Every country has its route taxes or share taxes or taxi buses. It's called different things in different countries. And they create a problem. They tend to get into accidents more. Not only more than regular private vehicles, but critically, they tend to get into more accidents than charter taxis, than taxis that you call up a number and ask them to come and pick you up and take you directly to a location. Why is it route taxis or share taxis drive so recklessly? More so than chartered taxis. This is an asymmetric information problem. You're at the bus stop and two route taxis are coming towards you. One is by a reckless driver who's going to scoot down the wrong side of the road and cut in front of traffic and break the speed limit. And the other one is by a safe, conservative driver who's going to stick to his lane, not break the rules of the road, stay within the speed limit. Now, the reckless driver because he drives recklessly, can make many more trips during rush hour. He can use his rolling stock, his capital, more efficiently. And so therefore, he can charge less. He can charge a lower price. Because the safer driver is going to end up making fewer trips. To cover his costs, he has to charge a higher price. The value of taking the reckless driver is lower than the value of taking the safe driver. But the commuter cannot look at the two cars approaching the bus stop and know the underlying value. She doesn't know what fare to offer. And so she takes the expected value route, which ends up being a willingness to pay that is not profitable for the safe driver. And the safe cars exit the market, and only the reckless ones are left. And since amongst the reckless, there is variation, then the problem reproduces itself, and you end up with only the most reckless ones that are involved in the market. And so this is why in countries, in cities in which there is weak enforcement of traffic rules, road taxes or share taxes end up driving the most recklessly. What looks like a problem of indiscipline really is just a market failure. The failure that is due to asymmetric information. What you can take away from this is that if both sides of the market have equal information, then the market works fine. But if both sides don't have equal information, the market devolves into the worst quality version of the product.